Hi, and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus. And a viewer asked me, when we're talking about like spying and all this crazy stuff, who exactly is the they that is spying on us? So who is they? They. That's actually a good question. And typically what we do is, say there are revelations about some spying data collection going on, or, the NSA spying on Americans, for example. And of course, there's usually like a congressional hearing or something, Facebook data breaches and all this, Facebook hoovering up, the Facebook app hoovering up all this data. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg goes in front of Congress or whatever and looks like a robot and pretends to smile and, all that stuff. And we usually try to look for the person or the group that explains it all, because as human beings, we like that. We like it if we can say, well, yeah, it's Mark Zuckerberg that's the problem, or it's the NSA that's the problem. And so then there's like some hearings or something, maybe some laws are passed, and then we can go about our business again. In the background, of course, that doesn't actually work. For example, I think it was called something like ECHO or something. There was this agreement between, I think it was the NSA and GCHQ, the NSA and British intelligence, where the NSA was not allowed to spy on Americans, of course. So what they did is they got together with British intelligence, and the NSA spied on the Brits, and the British spied on Americans, and then they just happened to exchange the data with each other. So technically, the NSA, legally, apparently, the NSA could say, no, we're not spying on you Americans. So, but they actually were. Like, they got this, they set this whole thing up, essentially, so that they could actually spy on Americans without actually upsetting anyone. Of course, that came out and it upset everyone anyway, so now, of course, they're just doing something different. And of course, it's not just the NSA. Going back into the old days of the Cold War and everything, you had the Army. They had computer networks, and they were trying to build a national database. And so, who is they? The short answer is that they is not any one group. It's not any one person. In fact, I mentioned this book before. Yasha Levine wrote a book called Surveillance Valley: The Secret Military History of the Internet. And you really, really, really need to read this book. It will help you to understand all kinds of stuff about how all these things work and why, how did Google become Google, and how Google from the very beginning was basically in bed with military intelligence circles, and everyone knew this all along. The very founders of Google knew what they were doing from the get-go and were actually worried about people finding out about it. Of course, from Google's side, it was about advertising, targeted ads, and from the intelligence/military side, it was about hoovering up data. And at that time, it was about hoovering up data for anti-terrorist operations. But when you read Levine's book, Surveillance Valley, I realize probably not a lot of people are going to read it, so I have a little summary here just to show how crazy this whole thing is, like who they has been over all these years. Going way back to the year 1967, 52 years ago. It was actually going on before this, but in 1967, there was a cover story on for the Atlantic Monthly, written by a University of Michigan law professor, blah, 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 blah. They wanted to create this thing called the National Data Center, and this was back in like the very early days of the precursors of the internet. And the military/intelligence/whoever wanted to create this national data center, which would centralize personal information, connected to a unique ID number for all citizens, blah, blah, blah. So this guy writes this cover story for Atlantic Monthly, and I mean, there were protests, there were like people were writing editorials, and they were totally outraged, and there was all kinds of hullabaloo way back in 1967 because people saw this coming, and like it was happening even way back then, and earlier. Television networks followed up on this guy's reporting. They carried their own in-depth investigations, huge hullabaloo. Then you fast forward a few years, and In 1971, there were hearings on the Army, the U.S. Army, spying on people. And this guy, Senator Ervin, said, quote, "These hearings were called because it is clear from the complaints being received by Congress that Americans in every walk of life are concerned about the growth of government and private records on individuals." By the end of 1970, about a year earlier, this National Defense Intelligence Center had 25 million files on individuals, 760,000 files on organizations and incidents. And many of these files were full of like all these crazy details, like people's sexual preferences, homosexuality, were people having like marital affairs. All of these things it was intelligence gathered about people and sort of centrally compiled, but it had nothing to do with these people's ties to foreign governments or their involvement in criminal plots. Or there was a lot of this that went on because of the Cold War, and it was like, we've got to get all the communists. So, back in those days, a lot of the motivation for all this was, well, we have to get the communists. Then you fast forward to like 2001 and the September 11th attacks, and it was, well, we have to get the terrorists. Today you fast forward and it's, we have to get, Donald Trump is president, we have to find out who, how did Russia get Donald Trump elected, because blah, blah, blah. There's all these different things going on, and the motivation for this changes over the years. But, and at each stage there's outrage, and there are even congressional investigations, but nothing actually changes. As I said, in 1967 it was basically like the Army. In 1971 it was the Army. In 1975, NBC aired another report that ARPANET, which is kind of the next evolution, which was also the precursor to what we know as the Internet today, the ARPANET was being used to spy on Americans. That was in 1975. In 1987, the precursor to the Internet had evolved, and they were wanting to turn or design this thing called the NSF Net, the National Science Foundation Network, where they were going to basically take their sort of ARPANET-y thing and they were going to connect it more or less with all the different universities across the U.S. And of course, there was some protests about all that. And Levine writes, "This new network, a government project created with public money, would connect universities and be designed to eventually function as a privatized telecommunications system." So this was when they were starting to take these various computer systems that they started putting together, before and during the Cold War, and then they started networking all the government organizations together, and then they started pulling in all these, and now they want to pull in the universities, and this became like the sort of the next step before suddenly the Internet was everywhere. And at each stage, you have all these groups and individuals involved for various and sundry reasons. Then in 1995, the NSF retired the NSF Net, and they handed control of it over to a handful of private network providers, as they had predicted. Private network providers that they had actually created themselves a little bit earlier. There wasn't any vote in Congress on this issue. There was no public referendum. There was no discussion. It just kind of moved along, and of course, then we had an Internet. Isn't that wonderful? A year later, Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which basically deregulated the whole telecom industry, and it handed control of all these different disparate networks. They became sort of all bundled together, and you had just like a few large conglomerates that had full control. So now you have private corporate control of what today is the Internet. Then you fast forward to 2004, and Gmail comes out and offers 1 gig of storage space. Now, Gmail is interesting. You got to read Surveillance Valley because he goes into more detail. But so Gmail offers 1 gigabyte of storage, and now they have cookies. They can do certain types of tracking. They could do other sneaky things. They have an email address that's tied to you. They have your search results. They have, as part of the whole agreement to, hey, you get 1 gig of storage, but you're getting it for free. Well, how are they paying for that? Well, they're actually scanning, and you agreed to allow them to scan all the emails that came through. So if you're interacting with someone via email and they write to you about some product, it could actually scan that email, and it could sort of understand that you want to, that person was recommending some product to you, so they'd start showing you ads on that particular product, or they could get data they could sell to someone else. There's all kinds of stuff they could do with it. So less than a week after Gmail's public launch, no less than 31 privacy and civil liberties organizations wrote to Google to protest. So again, here we are again in 2004. They knew what was going on. Everybody's up in arms. Anyway, it's a long story, but there was a Democratic, I think a senator by the name of like Liz Figueroa or something. We'll call her Figgy. She went on the attack against Google, and suddenly Al Gore becomes president, and oh look, no more attack, because supposedly behind closed doors Al Gore has a chat with her, says, I'm the Democratic president, you want to lay off Google, because of course Al Gore invented the internet, as we all know, and he was very much into basically innovation and that sort of thing, which also means business and making money and the way things usually go. Anyway, shortly thereafter, Google goes public, and in one day it was worth like $23 billion. And that's how it happened. And then, of course, fast forward to like 2013, you have the Snowden revelations, blah, blah, blah. The point here is that all of these things have been happening for many, many decades. And it's for different reasons. It's because of the Cold War. It's because of this. It's because of that. It's different groups. It's army intelligence. It's this intelligence group. It's that intelligence group. It's foreign intelligence agencies. It's individuals like Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and they found Google, and they have this great idea for this search engine, and then they can kind of hoover up some data, and then they have the possibility of selling this data or doing something with it, but they don't become popular unless they get help. I mean, how many different social networks were created? Which one became popular? Well, one of the most popular ones was Facebook. And then, of course, in recent times, as I mentioned, you have, privacy violations, Zuckerberg's in front of Congress, there's a hearing going on. And, why did it become popular? Well, you look into the history of Facebook and how it got its venture capital funding, and you look at the fact that venture capital funding often comes from intelligence agencies. In-Q-Tel is like a company that the CIA uses to fund companies, and it all sounds kind of crazy, but especially that's why I recommend reading Levine's book Surveillance Valley, because he spells it all out from way back in the day and just walks you through step by step, and you see how it all works. And it's basically a bunch of people and organizations and now corporations, and basically it's a bunch of people and even politicians. Look at Al Gore. Well, he obviously knew some people, Google and blah, blah, blah. And then, we all know the way that it works. You want to get elected to public office, and then this company's having this problem. So they'll say, well, hey, we'll fund your campaign if we'll scratch our back. You scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. Here's your money. But when you get elected, make sure this gets pushed through. And so then, and of course that politician is then beholden to that company, and of course all this is done, it's not supposed to be legal, but it's all done in ways that it is legal, kind of like the NSA and British intelligence sort of swapping intelligence so that they can spy on their own citizens. And this is just kind of how it all works, and it's all because these particular people, they're just kind of, I guess for the most part, they're just selfish. They want to make a lot of money. There are even different motivations as to why. Why does this intelligence agency want to hoover up data? Well, like I said, first it's the Cold War, then it's the war on terrorism, then it's this. And, the goal evolves over time. The people involved change over time. The corporations involved change over time. If you have multiple corporations, if I'm an intelligence agency and I'm getting data from Google on the one hand and Facebook on the other, that might be different kinds of data. Some people may use Facebook more and Google less, or maybe there's different purposes for each of them. Maybe it's different groups within those intelligence agencies that are gathering different data, or even the same data, but for different reasons. It's all kind of like this big, ballooned up, monstrous apparatus, and at the core of it is just a bunch of people basically being your average human being. And so yes, it is for advertising. It is to get data so that they can sell you stuff, but it's also to get information so that they can track everything that you do. Because for various reasons, somebody is always wanting to track everything that you can do. And maybe that data is just getting shoved into a database, but there are cases, documented cases of people getting sort of caught in the crossfire. They were tracking some evil criminal or terrorist or something, and you know, because you happened to be at the exact pizza parlor that guy was at, and blah blah blah, and then suddenly they're looking into your history and everything, and it's all a little bit crazy, and it seems like, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to go through this and, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, it's been going on for 52 years is because you can say, well, you know, it can't be a conspiracy. There can't actually be anything there, because how would it keep going over 5, 6, 7 decades? You know, is there some group at the core of it? And there doesn't need to be any group at the core of it, because it's just human nature, and it's greed, and it's sometimes it's actually patriotism, because you work for, you know, say the NSA or some whatever organization, the army, and you think that you're doing the right thing for your country, and you know, sometimes it helps, and sometimes people get caught in the crossfire, and yeah. So, and then of course, like, we have my recent video on, you know, China and Huawei, and why all that political stuff was going on, and all the, you know, don't use Chinese technology, and, you know, well, the Chinese are going to spy on you, well, you know, but the Americans are already, and Google's already spying on you, and so what do you care if the Chinese are spying on you, because they're over there, and all of this stuff is just part of the same giant beast of insanity, basically, of these different political movements and spying movements and money-making movements, and it's all just this big kind of conglomerate. So in the end, they is a whole lot of stuff. I mean, I suppose if you wanted to, you know, get down to brass tacks or something, given that it happens over decades and decades and it evolves continually over time, you could say that there's some giant, vast, you know, multi-decade conspiracy. But in that case, you'd have to look to, like, something higher, for example. You'd have to say, like, well, it's like Satan, Prince of Darkness, is the one controlling it all. And then you have to go, okay, well, maybe, I don't know. But as I say, you should read Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet, because, as I say, it walks you through it and you really understand how these things happen. At the same time that, you know, these corporations are becoming more popular and the intelligence agencies are spying on people, you have, like, you know, people who are sort of evangelists, and they're, you know, sometimes they'll have like an English degree, they understand nothing really about the technology, but they know some people, and they're kind of like, they're good salespeople, and so they get kind of promoted by this group or another, and suddenly they have their own magazine, like Wired magazine, and they're evangelizing and promoting all this wonderful technology, and behind that is actually these other groups who are basically pushing that for a specific reason. So it's not simple. It's, as I'm fond of saying, it's complicated. But in the end, like, really read Levine's book Surveillance Valley, because it really, you'll come away with it with a much deeper and broader understanding of how this stuff works. I can't really do it justice in a relatively short video. So, yeah, who's they? It's complicated. Right. So that's about it. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.